I died in 1941, shortly after my daddy went off to war. I was just 15 and already sick when he was drafted. I think Mama knew I wasn't going to make it, and she begged Daddy to find a way out of the draft. I don't know if he tried or not, only that he left, and then I died a few weeks later. Mama took it hard. I watched her fall apart from behind the walls of our house. It was, at one point, a nice house. Then the letter came, saying that Daddy was killed by a Nazi's bullet. Mama couldn't take that at all. My Aunt Charlotte took Mama in to live with her, which probably saved her life. Sadly, I've lost touch with Mama since then. I suppose odds are pretty high that she's dead too by now. I think all the heartbreak around Daddy and me dying trapped my soul in this old house. And since Mama never sold it, I doubt she could have borne to. No one ever moved in. If she's dead, she apparently didn't will the house to anybody. It's still abandoned by all but me. It's a little ways out of town, trees and bushes that were just saplings when I was breathing are big, wild things now. They've never been pruned, not once. I can't go outside the house to have a look, but I bet it isn't even visible from the road. I'd guess the bank owns this place now, and they've just decided to let it rot. You know what, though? I'm glad. Because being in an old abandoned house is the only way I get to have any fun. How? The teenagers, friend. Teenagers started sneaking in here on dares back in the early 90s, right as the paint was beginning to peel. First, they threw rocks through all the windows. I didn't appreciate that, although I could see the fun in it. I haven't aged a day since I died, so I'm still a 15-year-old spirit. The very first pair who actually snuck in here were a couple of guys just older than me who were dared by their giddy girlfriends. As they crept around, these guys were whispering about whether or not the house was haunted. So I slammed the door and sent them running and screaming. Over time, I gave this place a reputation as a bona fide haunted house. Round October, each year, kids come from other towns even to experience my knocking and slamming. They all thought they could handle it, but I sent every one of them scurrying off. Something changed in the early 2000s. The teens started seeming less afraid of me, more curious. I couldn't scare them off as easily, which was fine since I enjoyed having them around. But they also started trying to talk to me. They bring in tape recorders and cameras to try to capture the stuff I do. I was always careful not to make anything move on camera, though. I liked how everyone else just had to take the kids I scared at their word. Providing proof of myself would have ruined the mystique. Some of the teenagers brought weird energy into the house. It was like having somebody track mud across the clean floor. Except instead of mud, it was anger, depression, jealousy, all sorts of ugly things. One thing you learn when you're dead is emotions are very tangible. They have a charge like a magnet or a battery. The right charge gives me energy, makes the house sort of hum. Some of the teens call it the house's aura or vibe. But if you bring the wrong charge in here, something too negative, messes everything up. I feel tired. The house feels older, and sometimes I can sense things moving outside. I don't mean outside like in the yard. I mean outside my spiritual periphery. See, ghosts like me are not the only type of spirit. There's some really dark stuff out there. Those dark spirits, well, they're attracted to negative energy. I sense them lurking, feel them sniffing out the anger and jealousy and sadness in here. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the only thing keeping them out of this space. I am, in spite of everything, a pretty positive guy. There's one object which I will never ever allow into this house again. Whenever I see one, I immediately do something really scary, like make footsteps right behind the teenagers or brush at their hair. I do whatever I can to get them out of here. The object in question is something called a Ouija board. I hadn't never seen or heard of such a thing until the day I almost watched some poor kid lose his soul, and might have almost lost my house to an evil spirit. That, friend, after all of this existence, is a story I would like to tell you today. They came in a foursome: Gavin, Lily, Emma, and Roland. Gavin and Lily were the ghost enthusiasts. They came in with all the presuppositions one would expect from a couple of kids who think they know everything about a subject in which nothing is really known to the living. Emma didn't seem nearly as enthusiastic about the visit, even though she was the real empath in the group. That'll come in real handy for me later. You'll see. Now Roland made me uneasy. See, styles and fashion have changed so much since my time that I have difficulty reading people based on their appearance anymore. For example, 30 years ago, if someone crept in here at night wearing a pair of tattered jeans, I'd have assumed they were a junkie that needed to be chased out before they got too comfortable in my house. Nowadays, everybody's wearing jeans that look ready to fall apart. They're all the rage, as I've heard being hip called at one time or another. All this to say, I have to judge people by stuff that's intangible to the physical world, but potent to me. These things are like someone's mental balance or spiritual harmony. The closest thing I can compare these things to are smell, but you don't get them through your nose. You just kind of pick it up, much like when you drive by a hog farm and before you realize it, you're aware you're breathing in pig stink. Roland's pig stink comprised of grief, insecurity, and anger, disdain for the world and everything in it. I'm not a psychic, but I assumed right away that Roland had lost someone very close, probably recently. Roland had the spiritual posture of someone who's been personally insulted by death. The foursome crept around for a while, and I let them be. I wanted to feel them out. Between Emma's empathic abilities and whatever was going on with Roland, I guess I was sort of nervous about this bunch. Eventually they went upstairs and ended up in my room, of all places, the very room in which I died back in 41. That's when Lily pulled out the Ouija board, and I studied it while they all got comfortable, but I didn't really understand how it worked. Not until Gavin put this little triangle on the board that he called a planchette. Seeing the hole in the middle of the planchette, I understood how the letters on the board were laid out for spelling. The corners designated for yes or no. I found it a little strange that the board had a space for goodbye, but not one for hello. Anyway, I've become a master of suspense over the years, so I let the group play for a few minutes without a response. You know, what finally made me move the thing was that I wasn't sure I could. I wanted to find out. Started by just sliding it a tiny bit, not spelling anything or questioning and asking them anything. Boy, did that get my new friends excited. "Are you doing that?" Lily asked Emma, then Roland. Both shook their heads. Lily and Gavin shared a look. Then, all theatrically, she asked, "What's your name, spirit?" I could have spelled out something like Beelzebub or even Satan, but you have to build up to those sorts of things. Instead, I gave them my real name, B.O.B., Bob. I always went by Robert in life, but, well, Bob spells quicker. "Hi, Bob," Gavin said, after the group simmered down. "We've come here respectfully to try to get your story. We want to know about who you were, and if you'll tell us what the afterlife is like." "Well, Gavin, it's pretty fun because I get to mess with people like you," I thought, as I slid the planchette straight to no. I was trying to put myself in mind of a dark spirit, and I imagined such a thing would be pretty standoffish. "Oh, okay," Lily said. "Is there anything you do want to tell us?" "Can you ask it about, Roland said. "Well, we'll get there, don't worry," Gavin put in. I made him wait a few more seconds, then I slid the planchette around to spell "not safe." Oh, spooky, right? I told you I was good at this. I'd never used an Ouija board before, but same rules applied. Take it slow, keep it vague, give them lots of time to speculate and doubt themselves. "Not safe?" Gavin asked, but more to the group than to me. Roland squirmed like he couldn't get comfortable, or like he knew something he wasn't sharing. His pig stink bloomed around him, billowing out of the top of his head like a smokestack. I didn't like it. "Guys, can I be honest?" Emma asked. "I've actually been feeling a little unsafe, like something's off here. Maybe we should listen to what the board's saying." "Oh, Emma, no, don't spoil the fun." I guess she was picking up on her friend Roland's negative energy, but she was attributing it to me, attempting to come across like someone warning the group of danger, rather than threatening the danger myself. So I moved the planchette around to spell "trapped." As the group clamored about what that might mean, I decided to shake Gavin and Lily's confidence. I hovered over them both, plucked one hair from each of their heads. This took an immense amount of energy from me, but it was worth it. Both folded neatly in half on the floor. Then I dropped both their hairs onto the Ouija board. Pandemonium ensued. Gavin jumped to his feet. Lily slid back, elbows tripping. The other two stayed put, but sat up, stiff as corpses. All four were shouting and cursing and swearing. Do you want to hurt us?" Emma asked, and dang it, I would have slid it to yes when they all touched the planchette again, if anyone else had asked, but I couldn't do that to poor Emma. I liked her, she seemed sweet, and the fact that she had a connection with the spirit realm, well, reminded me of how it felt to have my crush assigned as my lab partner in high school. It didn't mean anything was gonna happen between us, obviously. That would be ludicrous given my terminal case of death, but it made it feel more possible, I suppose. Like I said, I'm still 15. I slid the planchette to no. "Can I ask something?" That was Roland. Gavin gestured at him to go ahead after he sat back down. "Have you been following me?" Before I could answer, I felt myself pushed backwards by a soft but unmistakably powerful presence. The room's weight suddenly doubled. I'd never felt anything like this before. I'll never know what the living teens felt, but they all removed their hands from the planchette and leaned away from the board at the same moment. I stretched forward to move the planchette, realizing only later how that might have been the scariest thing I did that night. They all sat transfixed as I pushed the planchette around to spell "careful." I wasn't trying to scare them, but I did worry a healthy dose of fear might be appropriate. I sensed movement from Roland's direction. He was looking down, staring at his own chest. Emma watched him closely. I believe she sensed what I saw. A shadow copy of Roland stood, rising from his body. At full height, he protruded from the boy's shoulders and neck. It stood well over 6 feet. It looked directly at me, held my gaze as it metamorphosed. Besides bearing Roland's general shape, it looked nothing like him. It was absolutely inhuman, with cheeks so thin and sunken I could see its jagged teeth outlined beneath the leathery skin. The eyes which held me were sunken far into the skull and as small as BBs, but they glowed brighter than anything else. The thing's smoky claws now commanded the planchette. Remember, Roland had asked the board if he was being followed. I was going to answer no before I was forced away by the new dark spirit. The dark spirit dragged the planchette towards yes, causing an anxious stir amongst the teenagers. It spelled safe now. The dark spirit's paper-thin lips parted slightly, and I could see pointed teeth as black as the rest of it. "Okay, that's good," Lily said. It says it's been following you, but that you're safe now, so that must mean it's, like, protecting you." "Yeah, that's definitely a good thing," Gavin agreed. "No, Gavin. No, Lily. It's not a good thing," I screamed at them, but, of course, they couldn't hear me. Emma glanced my way, though. The planchette started moving again, guided by the smoky claw of the figure protruding from Roland's back. It spelled Roland's name. Emma gripped his arm as if to anchor him. Then the dark spirit spelled out the cruelest, most obscene lie yet. "It's Mom." Again, the terrible figure sneered at me. I was now convinced that it was a demon. Emma's grip morphed into a sideways hug as she pulled poor Roland towards herself. He started crying. The other two exchanged nervous whispers, too quietly for even me to hear. The planchette began to move again, but I summoned every kilowatt of energy I could to reach through the pressure force field and stop it. The demon growled at me, and with a too long arm, it swiped me away. I spun backward like an astronaut through space. Emma sensed all of this. Still hugging Roland, she looked just above his head, exactly where the glowing demon protruded. "Mom, why did you do it?" Roland asked, voice choked by heartbreak. How could you just leave us like that?" This was real bad. I apologize for delaying what happened next, but you need to understand some things about death. See, there are different kinds of death. Mine was natural, but premature by natural standards. That sort of discrepancy, when combined with my mother's intense grief, created the environment which trapped me here. A death by human hands, be it murder or suicide, tears a hole through the separation between the living and the dead, like a bullet punched through paper. The holes take a long time to heal, if it ever does, and while it's open, just about anything can pass through. All this to say, the demon which had infested Roland had probably crawled through the hole left by his mother and attached itself to him. I bet it offered comfort at first, but judging by Roland's demeanor, even before the Ouija board session, it had already started getting mean. Classic demon trickery. If it could convince Roland to welcome it by pretending to be his mother's ghost, there's no telling how far it could take the possession. It might even kill Roland and harvest his soul. So when we left off, Roland, believing he was talking to his mother, had just asked how she could leave him. The demon began to answer, but I focused on getting the teens to safety. If I couldn't save Roland, then I wanted to at least try to protect the others. I'll admit, in the back of my mind, I was wondering what would happen if that demon fully manifested in my house. It had already demonstrated immense power over me, and that frightened me, for my own safety too. In the corporeal world, demons enter people. They dwell inside them and control them. Demons don't have that sort of use for us. Instead of possessing, they envelop and dominate us. They show us how little power and control we really have. I circumvented the group until I was behind Emma. That also put me right next to the demon, but it was occupied with the planchette, or maybe it didn't see me as a threat. Emma was the key. Her empathetic ability was the only tool I had left, but I wasn't sure how to use it. She'd shown that she could hear me, but could she understand? I didn't think so. I wondered if she might sense my touch. Keeping an eye on the demon, I took hold of Emma's free wrist, the one that wasn't on Roland's shoulder. She immediately flinched away. I understood why, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. I tried again, this time only touching the back of her hand, and I projected my desire to save her and her friends. I even whispered to her, "I'm here to protect you." At least one of these tactics worked, and Emma allowed my hand to stay. I slid my thumb behind hers so I could gently guide her hand to the Ouija board. "No, Emma, leave it alone," Gavin said. "God, that idiot, purporting to be so keen on the spirit world, yet being so dully insensitive to it." I could have punched him. I gave Emma a reassuring squeeze, which she emphatically understood. I guided Emma's hand towards the word goodbye at the bottom of the board and gave her another squeeze, then let her go. I felt confident that she would know what to do. "Guys, I think we need to end this," she said, her hand hovering over goodbye. "No!" Roland shouted, a deep anger boiling beneath his voice. "It's not his mother," I whispered to Emma, and thank the Lord she could understand me. Enough to matter, at least. Emma now pleaded with Gavin and Lily. "We need to end this session right now, guys. Something's really wrong. I can feel it." "I need to talk to her," Roland argued. "Roland, I don't think your mom is talking. I think it's something bad," Emma said, turning to him. "Yeah, she might be right," Lily said. "Before it said it was your mom, it was telling us we weren't safe and all that, remember?" Words can't describe how grateful I was to hear my silly prank may have saved the day. "Oh, yeah, spirits do lie to get what they want sometimes," Gavin said. "I can feel her, though," Roland whispered, but he sounded unsure. Emma's hand went to the planchette. Again, the demon's shadows clawed. I noticed her hand was outlined by a faint white aura. Whatever energy gave Emma her emphatic ability was something wholesome and beautiful. It forced the demon to retract angrily, almost like it had been burned. Gavin touched the planchette again, then Lily. They all looked at Roland, but he didn't move. Emma took his hand in her free one and pulled it towards the planchette. He still clearly did not want to end the session, but he allowed this to happen. They all four of them were touching the planchette. Emma slid it to goodbye, and as if it had never been there, the demon vanished. I whispered thanks to Emma, but closing the session had dulled her connection to me. I'll admit this made me a little sad, despite the victory we had won. The teenagers left shortly after, and I haven't seen them since. That must have been, 10 years ago now. It's hard to keep track. Roland didn't seem any lighter when he left that night. Unfortunately, I have to assume that he still had the attachment. But with a friend like Emma by his side, I hope he's been able to rid himself of it. Can't imagine she would have let him go on like that. The white light I saw around her hand made it easy to believe she saved him. And, like I already mentioned, Ouija boards aren't allowed in my house anymore. These days, kids are using all kinds of electronic equipment, though, and the Ouija board seems to be getting less popular. That's good. You just can never know what's really talking to you with one of those things. It could be a swell guy like me, or could be something much, much darker. It's best just to keep those channels closed. You can't ever really know who or what is speaking to you from the other side. Have you ever stared at something so long that somehow time seems to fade into obscurity? What feels like mere seconds, in reality has been minutes. Well, me neither. That was until I first saw the void. I can't explain what it's like or how it feels, but it's something that can only be sensed, like when staring at the corner of your room in the dark. You can sense something is there, but you can't see it. You just know. That's how the void makes you feel. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up, while your eyes just gravitate towards it, unwillingly. It all started when my girlfriend got her first apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom in the middle of the city. She was excited, and I wanted to be supportive. So I did my best to show my adulation on her starting this new chapter of her life. I was on a break for the semester and was coming back home. Me and my girlfriend had done our best to make a long-distance relationship work, and both me and her were beyond elated to see each other. But, more importantly, she was eager for me to see her apartment. As soon as I got home, I told my parents, hi, ate a delicious lunch my mom prepared for me, something I was craving all semester, and headed to my girlfriend's. Arriving at the complex, I was taken a bit back. The place was guarded with security that was armed. They swarmed around the perimeter, guarding the entrance. As I approached closer, I could see the armed guard begin to look me up and down, and before I was able to get a word out, he interjected. Sir, no soliciting. You must leave the premises, the oversized man told me. The demeanor of the guard left me a bit bewildered, thinking perhaps I had the wrong place. I pulled out my phone to double-check the address, and to add to my confusion, it was indeed the right place. Sir, please leave the premise, the giant man once again said. Still confused, I did my best to mutter out a coherent sentence, feeling intimidated by the man brandishing the rifle. My girlfriend lives here, Kimberly. I'm here to visit her. She lives in 4B, I told the stoic man, my voice shaken with apprehension. The guard remained silent and unmoving, all while staring at me intently, and several seconds passed by before he spoke. He radioed to whomever was on the other side of the receiver. You're good. Please enter, the man told me, while now brandishing a bit of a smile, or perhaps a smirk. I gave him a little smile and walked past the guard as I entered the building. Something about the entrance, other than the usual circumstances, felt off. I could hear the most abnormal humming penetrating from the walls. I ignored it and walked towards the elevator, still jovial at the revelation of seeing my girlfriend. Approaching her door, I could still hear the humming engulfing me, as if a giant motor was filtering air. I knocked on the door and stood with anticipation. As Kimberly opened, all the worries that had inundated my mind evaporated into a cloud of emptiness, and all my attentions were set on the most beautiful woman in the world, my girlfriend. Hey, Kimberly shouted, while jumping into my arms. I didn't even have a chance to respond. My voice was silenced as she showered me in an endless sea of kisses. She quickly pulled me into the apartment, continuing to chatter on about how she had been and how life was coming into place for her, but mostly she was talking about the apartment. As she walked me around for the grand tour, which only took about a minute, her rant continued on without a pause, and as my mind gradually began to drift a bit, my eyes locked onto her balcony. You got a balcony? I asked, with a bit of enchantment. Oh yeah, I forgot to show you. Come have a look, she said, grabbing my hand and pulling me outside. I was a bit disappointed. I was thinking perhaps she had a scenery of the skyline. Instead, it was a direct view into the courtyard, a view she shared with all her other neighbors. I looked around at what seemed to be an endless sea of balconies, Staring at all the apartments above and below me was making me a little dizzy. Whoa, I didn't realize the complex was so big. How many floors are there? I asked, astonished. Kimberly just shrugged her shoulders, dismissing my question, and started pointing to her neighbors, gossiping about who she suspected to be a weirdo. My eyes followed her fingers, seeing that most of the balconies were vacant of anyone. But we only saw one person. It was a woman just standing still and unmoving like some statue. She was leering down at the courtyard. That caught my attention since she was positioned in such an odd way. I looked down to see if I could make out what she was seeing, but to my dismay there was nothing. What's she staring at? I asked rhetorically. Kimberly abruptly stopped talking and realized who I was referring to. Huh, I don't know, she told me, practically dangling over the top of the guardrail as she tried to figure out what the lady was gawking at. Damn it, Kimberly, be careful, I said with frustration, pulling her back over. She stared at me curiously. This whole place is a bit weird, isn't it? I mean, what's up with all the security guards outside? I could see Kimberly's charming eyes drop with disappointment due to my criticism, her arms grasping at her waist with frustration. So you don't like my place? Thanks. Those guards are here because some politician's kid lives here, or something like that. Honestly, it makes me feel safe, she told me, as she turned to walk back inside. I felt a knot turning in my guts, knowing that I'd hurt her feelings, so I approached her as she was still turning away from me and embraced her, kissing her neck. I'm sorry. It's a great place. I guess it's just weird being back. I don't know, I said as I caressed her tenderly. She turned and looked at me with those enchanting emerald eyes. I could feel my heart skip a beat when she smiled. As night progressed, I tried to brush off the weird encounter with the balcony and just enjoyed myself with the love of my life. As we watched movies, I stayed the night and found it difficult to sleep. I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling as my girlfriend breathed deeply in her slumber. It was that humming. I could still hear it. I got out of bed and walked into the living room, grabbing at my head, feeling an intense pounding permeating. The sound seemed to be coming from outside. I walked towards the balcony cautiously and slid the glass door open, the moonlight showing the complex in a vibrant blue tint. I stepped out onto the balcony, hoping that the fresh air would relieve some of my anxiety. Instead, I was presented with the most frightening sight. The lady from earlier was standing on the same place, staring down at the courtyard. Ma'am, are you okay? I asked, directing my words towards the woman. She remained still and unresponsive, the surrealness of the situation sending a chill down my spine. That's when my caution morphed into a bit of terror. Through my peripherals, I noticed that there were now more neighbors on the balcony, all standing in that same emotionless stance. I turned to get a closer look at the others and realized that they too were staring down at the courtyard. As I stared at them with disbelief, one man turned his gaze to me, catching me completely by surprise. His expression was riddled with pure terror, defeat engulfing his eyes as they glistened in the moonlight from tears. I could feel him whispering something to me from across the courtyard, and as my brain did its best to put the words together that he was mouthing, I soon realized he was asking for help. I stepped back into the apartment, horrified, my retreating away from the moonlight balcony. Hey! I practically jumped in the air like a scared cat, my girlfriend having startled me. What are you doing? Why'd you get out of bed? Kimberly asked. I remained quiet for a few seconds, trying to recover my breath as it had escaped me, my heart still beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. Sorry, I couldn't sleep. That humming was bothering me on the balcony. Again with the balcony. Just don't go out there if it bothers you so much. What humming are you talking about? The air conditioning? Kimberly asked angrily. I understood that she must have felt I was criticizing her apartment, so I didn't respond. We just went back to bed. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house under the guise of wanting to spend some time with my family. Well, at least that's what I told Kimberly. In reality, I couldn't spend another minute in that horrid apartment. Just thinking about what had happened last night made my skin crawl, and I could feel a wave of relief wash over me knowing I was far away from that place, away from those people. Days passed, and it quickly turned into a week. My mother became curious as to why I was no longer spending time with my beloved girlfriend. I don't get it. Summer's almost over, and soon you'll have to go back to school. Why don't you spend the last week with her? Or did you guys break up? I didn't know how to respond. In all honesty, I hadn't even talked to Kimberly in weeks. In fact, she hadn't even texted me or called me for some reason that left me feeling a little bit left out. The feeling of being perturbed quickly morphed into one of concern once I had the revelation of perhaps her neighbors had gotten her. "Son, are you okay?" my mom once again asked, disrupting my deep thoughts. "Yeah, sorry, Mom. I guess I was sort of thinking about how fast the summer had gone by, and you're right. I'm going to go see her today, actually. We had a big dinner planned," I lied. No need to get her involved with this apartment nonsense, I thought. I reached into my pocket to retrieve my phone and nervously searched for Kimberly's number. I dreaded calling her, knowing what place she lived in, almost as if the complex could sense my fear. There she was, a finger press away from knowing if she was okay or not, but I waited and waited, time clicking ever so slowly, as I could hear my mother's footsteps in the background, almost urging me to dial. Click. The phone didn't even ring, it just went straight to voicemail. Somehow, in the back of my mind, I knew what had happened. The place wanted me to go there. It wanted me to rescue Kimberly. As I stood still, lost in my own contemplations, I couldn't explain anything other than divine intervention took control of my limbs, and with haste I made my way out the door into my car. I was going to save the love of my life. Arriving at the apartment, I noticed the armed guards were no longer present. I didn't see any movement of life outside at all, in fact. The complex was desolated. I could hear that dreaded humming from outside, the sound that was getting louder. I almost regretted my decision to come back to this place, but I had to save Kimberly. I cautiously made my way up to her apartment, and to my dismay, the door was wide open. The apartment was absent of sound or any light, darkness protruding out into the corridor. "Kim, are you there?" I called out. I breathed in deeply, swallowing my trepidation as I walked into the apartment. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I wandered around, still calling out for Kimberly, and that's when I saw her. She was out on the balcony. She stood unmoved as her body cradled back and forth in one place, as her head was positioned down towards the courtyard. I quickly ran to her, grabbing her shoulders and turning her to face me, but her gaze was vacant, her eyes glazed over. "Kim, answer me. What happened? Snap out of it," I demanded, as her tears began streaming down her face. She remained unresponsive, a bit of drool sliding down her chin. She was completely gone, and all I could do was embrace her, crying, wishing that she would come back. That's when I heard her voice. It was calling me to the courtyard. "Kim?" I whispered out, utterly confounded. I carefully looked over the balcony, my eyes crawling as it gazed down at the dark courtyard. All the neighbors were still in their same positions. That's when I finally saw it. It was something I'd never seen before, some sort of chasm that glowed. I don't know how I couldn't have seen it before. "I'm down here. It's beautiful. Come down here with me," Kimberly's voice told me. That humming, it was coming from that void, and now I couldn't look away, as I just kept staring into it. "Kim's down there. I just want to be with her. I don't know how long I've been staring at it, but if you ever hear a humming, just know it's coming from the void, and whatever you do, don't stare into it." Ever since I was little, death was a next-door neighbor. I mean, literally right next door. I could look out the window and see it. I could watch through my bedroom window as Mom walked towards it. Every day, she would wake up before the sun and make her brisk walk to work. It took me a long time to discover what she did, and even longer to understand it. She would pry bodies apart and put them back together, prettier than they were when they arrived. They arrived in dark vans, bruises all over their bodies, and they would leave with eyeliner and makeup. That's where I learned that one can measure life in shades of purple, whether it be bruises or makeup. Measured, mind you, not defined. So naturally, that's where I saw my first body. I'd try to sneak in now and then, and I guess I was never successful. Mom always thwarted me, but eventually, I just wore her down. It was too much being the mortician and the security guard. So there he was, a fairly innocent death. He looked so natural, but just a little less. I always thought I would take after Mom, and for a while I was on track to. I'm not even sure how I got sidetracked. I enjoyed making Mom's job look nice. She always kept it so dour, and I had wanted to spruce up the place. I felt fulfilled when it all came together, and I felt like I normally do, just a little more. I did it for my house, then I did it for my mom, my friends, my neighbors, and before I even knew what was happening, I was trying to convince people to buy a house. My houses sold, and people took notice of how I put them together. I guess, if I were to be poetic, that's how I took after Mom. I took these houses, the remains of them, and dolled them up as best I knew how. I made it look nice. So nice that you'd never know it was dead at all. For a long time, I thought that when people died, that was it. No ghosts, no heaven or hell. It was a snap, and you were just gone. Like a house. When the furnace goes out, when the walls rot away, and the spider webs consume every window, I thought the house was gone. I know now that's wrong. Despite working with my mom for many years, I never entertained the notion of ghosts. It wasn't until the house on Wilbur Street that I changed my mind. I won't go into too much detail, but that house was its own beast. And if it weren't for a strange but generous buyer, it might have been the end of my career. It was a weed, though. Something that sprouted in me, unwelcome but beautiful nonetheless. A world you might not have ever heard of. A world that probably, if not for what I'm telling you now, you would likely go your whole life without knowing about. In the housing market, there exists a small but dedicated sect reserved for the enigmatic influential, or even the nefarious. I'm talking about the buying and selling of houses that have, in one way or another, been deemed haunted. Just like any realtor, I'll get my hands on a house sometimes. Sometimes I find it myself, sometimes it's offloaded by a larger realty company. Regardless, I'll go in, make the house look as nice as possible, just like I would with any other house. That was before I discovered this unofficial and morbid market. Unlike an unafflicted house, however, I would research and experiment. With enough research, I can gather information on who perished within the house and the cause of death. I also need to be mindful of people who lived in the home but had relocated, as spirits can travel back to where their emotions were the strongest, like a magnet pulling in metal sand. After gathering the information, I conduct my small experiments. The severity and nature of the haunting need to be distinguished and defined before I can even list the house. Something you might not know about most hauntings is how consistent they are. Sure, the activity will alter, but it will happen over and over. I've had houses you could set a stopwatch by. I use a marker to outline cups and dishes in order to check if they've been pushed. I take pictures of each room every hour, on the hour, so I can meticulously comb through them. Something you may or may not know about typical hauntings is they can be boring. Rarely do you come across an outwardly aggressive home. And when you do, the type of people that buy those, it's not my place, but it's troubling to think about what they might want the home for. That's neither here nor there, though. Haunted homes sell to many people. You have eccentrics and ghost hunters who want a place for entertainment. There are people who practice the dark arts, though you can typically sniff out the wannabe types. There are even people who just really need a home and try to get a cheaper deal. Depending on the haunting and its interest, sometimes they do. You have to call it a loss at some point and lower the price just below market value. That's how you do it. That's what this house was, I thought. Another suburban home I was going to take a hit on. Boy, was I wrong. Of course, that's how tales like these come to be. If I was right, if all I ever saw was a coffee mug move across the counter, then you'd never hear a peep out of me. The house was on Carter Avenue. If you don't know which Carter Avenue out of the hundreds that likely exist, then yes, you're not meant to. I got it for a bargain from my peer because, well, it was a house that nobody had high expectations for. There wasn't a history of violence or any mention of the occult, just a younger couple that passed away in their sleep. Carbon monoxide leak. To me, though, the house was lovely, if not for a small string of reported activity. The house could have been sold on its merits. It was in a quiet neighborhood. Everything looked new and had been taken care of. It was a picture of suburban living. So I hedged my bets and thought I would just make the house look like a proper home for anyone looking to buy. It took a while, an uncomfortable amount of time, before I'd got a bite. While I toiled away looking through photos of the house's bedroom, my phone buzzed. It was a buyer. A young couple looking to buy their first home. The woman on the phone beamed about starting a family of their own. So we set up a date to meet, and I plunged further into Carter Avenue. As bizarre as it is to say, I wanted to make sure the haunting was child-friendly. No loud noises or aggressive movements, you understand. For the most part, though, the house was quiet. Sure, there were signs, but the haunting was so mellow, you'd never know it if you weren't looking for it. A slight push that would move a cup from its outline. Pictures on the wall that would go askew, and a penny was even pushed off the counter. That was all, so, just enough. It was just enough activity for it to make the difference between haunted and natural occurrence. Maybe I should have had my wits about me in that regard. Though I know, when I offer myself grace, there's no way I could have known it was anything other than a run-of-the-mill haunting. The day of the showing plays in my head from time to time. I always go back to when I was starting down the hall. It was right before the couple was supposed to show up. I stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down the hallway. It led to all the bedrooms and had light bleeding in from each. The sun was gentle and warm. It created a vignette in the hall. At the end of the hall there was a picture hanging above a small table, decorated with various books and a small fern. The picture was an oil painting, a stark mixture of black and white. Upon seeing it initially, you'd assume it was nonsense, a Rorschach test of sorts. If you took the time to soak it in, though, at least for me, I made out the picture. It almost always looked like an animal with a wide-open jaw, a howl of anguish. Once I made out the mouth, the rest followed suit. Maybe the face was meant to be beautiful, but it looked straight out of hell to me. It felt crooked. It, however, was a painting in the home that the haunting hadn't affected. To the naked eye, the painting was perfectly straight, lined right up to the surface of the table under it, but it felt crooked. I could feel the painting making one side of my head heavier, craning my neck as if trying to see it from a new angle. The hall itself felt as though it was stretching out, pulling the details of the painting further and further away from me. The once warm vignette ignited from the room, turning into static with the tunnel. So it shouldn't come as a shock when I say I nearly jumped out of my skin when I heard the front door shut. My arms rushed to my chest as if guarding me from an incoming attack. Even without my hands actually on my skin, I could feel my heart smacking around inside. A few breaths in and out calmed me, and I gathered my senses. I quickly rushed down the stairs and spotted the couple, Sandra and Owen Welling. The door had startled me, but I'd informed them upon their arrival that they could just come in, as the house wasn't exactly booked for tours. Bounding down the stairs, I immediately started in with the pleasantries. They looked as normal as can be. The woman was a blonde, her hair just barely touching her shoulders. The man looked tired, almost like he had headed straight to the home from work. His brown hair haphazardly swooped to one side. I couldn't help but notice he was sheepish, letting the woman take the lead and speaking up very little. Admittedly, this annoyed me. They were a couple, and while every dynamic is different, I found it odd that he had so little interest in where he might build a family. It happened, though, and swung both ways. Suppose it's nothing more than a pet peeve, but it did inform me to pay more attention to the wife. So, with her trailing closely behind me, we toured the lower floor. It felt almost like it used to, showing off regular homes. The activity in the house was so sparse that I'd rarely stop to talk about it. In the kitchen, I informed them that it's best to leave cups and dishes a respectful distance from the edge. In the dining room, I informed them that sometimes they could hear a knocking on the floor above. The knocking noise was not audible from anywhere else in the house, which is probably the most peculiar haunt in the home, but it's harmless. She asked questions here and there, but it wasn't until we began to ascend the stairs that she started delving deeper. In the first bedroom, she asked me who the previous occupants had been. I told her it was a young couple, though I only knew their names. We sometimes find photos left behind by the previous occupants, but this time, especially with younger folks, the families affected will snatch up photos before I even get my hands on the house. It might seem odd that I don't go too deep into the lives of those who are supposedly haunting the grounds. I did early on. I'd familiarize myself with their faces and history, but I found that doing so would cause a confirmation bias. I would see faces where there might not have been one, or I'd pick up smells related to the previous death and assume it was paranormal, when it could just be a clogged drain. The woman stalled for a moment and rested her hand on the doorframe. I could only see her back. The sun beaming through the windows wrapped a glow around her thin figure. "It's cold." I hardly heard the words when she spoke them. They were distant, like they were afraid to leave the room. She was right, though. It was cold, and noticeably so. The house was monitored for temperature variations, but nothing so severe. The skin on my arms prickled. I thought the cold would have made me shiver, but after taking in the new chill, I realized my pocket was buzzing. I ignored it, realizing the man had drifted out of sight, though only barely. He stood in the hall, looking at the same painting that had mesmerized me earlier. "This would make a great nursery," the woman said, her voice louder this time, but still distant. I was watching the man, though, his arms sheepishly jostling from side to side like he was fidgeting with something. A tension had built in my chest, partially from the cold gripping my lungs. Reaching into my pocket, I quickly retrieved the phone, intending to ignore the call as the vibrating was audible. "Oh, absolutely. It's great for sunlight in the mornings," I replied, glancing at her as I spoke. I glimpsed the same silhouette before returning to my phone's touchscreen, and just like the painting had before, the illuminated screen stole my attention. I couldn't have been more than a minute, though. Despite how long it felt, the clock in the upper right corner didn't change. An incoming call. The sensation of the phone rattling in my hand acted as a warning bell, a siren of things to come. Incoming call from Sandra Wellings. The words couldn't have felt heavier in my hands. Her voice, when I picked up the phone, couldn't have been louder in my head. I listened to the woman on the other line apologizing. She was embarrassed. They had fallen asleep on the couch and had no alarm set. She was asking me if they could still come by or if I wanted to reschedule. A reply, no matter how desperate I was for it, did not come, and as Sandra continued bidding for my attention, I could only look down the stretching hallway. In the deserted hallway, the only object present was the small white plastic dish and 2 batteries lying nearby. Suddenly, I became horrendously aware of the figure that was in the doorway. I couldn't see her as I started down the hall, but God, could I feel her. Her presence felt so stifling, I thought I might fall through the floor. A soft whimper of denial weaseled its way up my throat. It felt like I was being told a story, or rather, it felt like a story I'd already known, but that had been pushed deep down. This was someone else's story, a story of a death much more sinister than the public knew. This would be a great room for a nursery, the figure spoke, and as if those words manifested, I could feel strands of hair drop on the side of my face. She must have been as tall as she felt, hunched over with her head pressed against the ceiling, dark strands hanging like stalagmites. She wanted me to look. I could feel it. Her gaze fixed on me and burned holes through my scalp. Closer and closer, I could feel her warm breath wafting on the side of my face. The smell was more noticeable, though, or rather the lack thereof. I could only watch the painting, the hallway, once again tunneling as I pondered if it was safer to look at her or ignore her. Hauntings could get bad. Yes, even this bad. I've experienced little myself, but this wasn't my first time, though my heart still bumped like it was. When the retching began, the decision to focus on the hallway became one that I picked. A guttural and whining scrap lurched from the woman, though. It sounded like pulling marbles down from metal tubing, and after a moment, something spilled from her mouth. I could hear small thuds smacking the ground, one after another. Once again, the sound reminded me of marbles. Then she was gone. I released the breath that had been held down as her weight lifted off me, allowing my skin to loosen. Looking down, they were all splayed out at my feet. They must have rolled around quite a bit after hitting the floor. A portrait drawn with AA batteries, a tale of heartbreak, scored by the chiding of a baby. A soft whine, much softer than the woman's. That room really does get so much sun. It had rested such a lovely glow on the crib inside. I could hear the baby crying from within it. I'm sure I could have heard it from anywhere in the house. It was ethereal, something I couldn't escape. It echoed through the walls and bounced around the room as I took my first step inside. The batteries around my feet shuffled aside and rolled, clattering against one another. A game of electric billiards. The sound of the baby crying became less defined with each step I took, its cries being pulled further through the veil. The white wooden slats of the crib ceased to be an obstacle, and I could peek over the edge. I didn't intend to step further. The bile was already churning. The sides of the crib acted like a dam for the wet, sticky mess inside. All that white was painted freshly red, a crimson that glistened in the sun. My legs gave out, and I crashed to the floor. The hardwood vibrated on impact. I felt my throat choke and scratch. Burning came afterwards in intervals. I was getting air, never catching my breath. A burning rose in my chest, nails dragging. Looking down at my shirt, I could see long dark lines running along my skin, like aged scratch marks. "I'm sorry," I whispered, cowardly, pensive. Looking up, he was lying on the floor, the boyfriend, the man. He was clawing at his chest, and his body writhed. The veins in his eyes crept towards the pupils like vines. His eyes rolled up, his gaze reached far above his head. This mess of a man, he was watching her, so scared of her now. She was looming over me again. All her hate and grief sat like a ball in my neck. All her unbridled horror wrapped around me, and I felt it. I could feel the hot, stinging tears running down my cheek. All that horror, waking up in the middle of the night, feeling how weak your body is. She must have known, or maybe she saw him taking them out. He probably told her, Told her he was replacing them. A depth of despair I could only understand when I looked into her eyes, dying, knowing the life inside of you would follow. I thought, truly, that her face would be horrific, a mangled mess of bones and flesh, red and pulse. Horrific indeed. But there was no blood, just tears. The streams disobeying gravity. They twisted around her face and slipped around the curves of her nose. Her very own soul, a Rorschach. Pain will paint our lives. It can shape the way we see things. It can change the feeling of a room. It can haunt the memories you once held dear. No matter how many times you try to paint over that pain, it's still there. And I felt it on my face that day, as a few of her tears relented, failing to mix with mine. I knew her more intimately than I knew myself. That's the real ghost, and I suppose it always will be. The pain. We locked eyes, and although I understood her, the fear did not subside. A part of me felt like if I moved, she would change. If I broke off the conversation, as it were, then I would see something worse. The pain was a mask, and I could feel whatever was under it was in torment. I still think about it sometimes. The man was there in all his horror, face beet red and swollen, his throat ravaged with claw marks as he gasped for air, feeling as though he was being suffocated, regretting the decision he had made, probably telling himself in his final moments that he could have just left, and he was right. Of course, he likely died thinking of himself, and that was a moment of solace for me, that in his last thoughts he realized just how stupid he was. Even as I heard his body writhe around, pudders of liquid spilling from his mouth, even as he smacked the floor with what little strength he had left, begging for mercy, I watched his face, long and black, curtain-like strands of hair cutting off my peripherals, so all I could see was her. I stared into her face, dread growing closer. My eyes started to lose focus as she looked down at me. Her face appeared to stretch away from me like it was retreating down a hallway. She moved further and further, the guttural sound from before echoing around the column of hair she created. It got louder, growing as she shrank. Before too long, her face appeared like a two-dimensional object in the distance, just her misery, hanging solitary in a museum. At that distance, the noise was suffocating. A chirp layered on top of 1,000 other chirps until I couldn't stand it anymore, and my eyelids slammed shut. The noise halted then, and quiet returned. My breathing was deep and ragged, and after wrestling with the thought, I opened my eyes again. Staring down the hallway, I felt the phone in my pocket buzz. Reaching into it, I read that Sandra was trying to get a hold of me again. Only 3 minutes had passed since she called. Accepting the call, I heard her rambling. I only focused on what she was saying when she asked if I was showing other people around. The words came out before I thought about how to phrase them. I just asked, "Did you hear her too?" Sandra chimed that she had, but hung up when the baby started crying, as it was hurting her ears. She continued talking as I zoned out, hypnotized by the hallway once again. "The house isn't a fit for you," I cut her off, cold and direct. "This house was no place to raise a baby. Someone will buy it, but I won't sell it. A damn shame, too. The light coming in through the window at the end of the hall really livens up the place." If you read this, do not try to find me. She's in the shadows, watching with burning eyes, anywhere and everywhere. No matter how far I go or where I am, she's there, watching. I'll try to explain what happened. It started with a walk in the woods. I usually go there to clear my head, but this time was a bit different. Life has been difficult. My father, the only consistent figure in my life, passed away a few months before. My relationship with my girlfriend broke down. I was working as much as I could, but I could never keep up with my debt. Life was becoming a landslide, and I had the intention to end it. What better place than the woods? It was a beautiful day. I went for a walk with a backpack filled with rope and a pre-tied noose. I found a tree off the beaten path I could tie myself to. I expected a dog walker would find me at some point. They always seem to find the bodies. I was securing the noose to a branch when the puppy found me. I didn't recognize the breed. It had shaggy black fur with a faint silver ridge along the spine and beautiful, burning amber eyes. It looked at me and I felt ashamed. It seemed too young to be walking free in the woods, and it must have been lost. I untied the noose and climbed down from the tree. The pup stood waiting, its tail wagging. I knelt beside it and gave it a stroke of the head. It had no collar. He could have been lost or abandoned. "All right, boy, what are you doing out here?" I asked. He wagged his tail and licked my hand. There was some movement amongst the bushes. I called out to see if its owner was nearby, but got no response. The weather began to turn. Heavy gray clouds quickly filled the sky, and thunder rumbled through the trees. The air became thick with the storm energy. "We should get you somewhere safe," I decided, taking the pup back to my car. That was when I started noticing things were strange. The rain began to come down, drumming heavily on the car roof. The once beautiful day became dark. I decided to drive towards a vet I knew locally. If they couldn't take him in, they could surely suggest someone who would. They can check for a chip and maybe find the owners. I put the puppy in the passenger seat of my car. As I drove out of the car park, a flash of lightning showed something amongst the trees. A silhouette of a deer or a large dog, maybe, barely distinguishable from the shadows. I drove on. With the next lightning flash, the creature was closer, just off the side of the road. It could have been a man, or it was something four-legged but facing me. Two embers ignited in what could have been a pair of eyes. I didn't feel like waiting to find out what was watching me. I sped up and pulled out onto the main road. As I drove, the pup fidgeted in excitement, sniffing at the seat and playfully mouthing at my hand as I tried to hold him in place. I went to the vet only to find them closed. I searched my phone for dog rescue homes, but there was nothing nearby. "Looks like you're coming home with me, boy," I told him. I think he looked happy about that. Maybe I was projecting. Lightning flashed again. If I was going to take him home, I thought I'd better stock up on some food. It would require dipping into my overdraft, but at this point I didn't really care about anything but this dog. I stopped at my local shop and left him inside the car. At least I thought I did. While I was at the checkout buying a single tin of dog food and some treats, he appeared yapping at my feet. "You can't bring dogs in here," the miserable sleep-deprived shopkeeper snapped at me. I didn't. Sorry," I stumbled back. I scooped him up under my arm and went back to the car with my shopping. The door was locked. He must have snuck out before I shut the door. I was sure he was still inside when I locked it, though. I saw him through the window. I must have been wrong. I couldn't claim to be in the clearest state of mind, given my original plans for the day. I bundled him back in the car with the shopping. Despite not necessarily being a good boy, I told him that he was, and tore open the bag to invite him to a treat. I started my car, and there was another flash of lightning. It cast a shadow over the road where the thing stood, watching me, eyes burning. It was getting closer, close enough to make me afraid. I floored it, pulling away from the shop and into the road without even looking, my tires spinning to find traction. I checked the rearview mirror as I sped away to see if the shadowy creature was giving chase, but I saw nothing. I looked forward, and with a flash of lightning, It was there in the middle of the road. 2 eyes burning bright as fire hovered in the shadows of an old oak tree. The creature was at one with the darkness, appearing only in the shadow of the flickering lightning. In the brief moment of shadow, I could just make out faint wisps of eerie pale glow weaving through the void. My eyes were unable to make sense of the shapes. I jumped on the brakes, forcing the car behind me to screech to a halt. The puppy tumbled forward and into the footwell with a yelp. "What are you doing?" the driver shouted from behind me. I ignored him and helped the puppy back onto the seat. He wagged in excitement. I looked around for the beast, but there was no sign of it. The lightning had stopped. The rain was lightening now, and the dark clouds were rolling away as quickly as they came, letting the daylight through. The road before me was clear. The driver behind me sounded his horn. He didn't see anything. "You okay, boy?" I asked. He seemed unconcerned about anything that was happening in the world. "We should get home," I said. I drove through the town, wary of every shadow. Felt like I was being watched, but couldn't see whatever was watching me. Every flicker of light or patch of darkness put me on edge. Car headlights reflected off the wet road and cast images onto my mind. I began to doubt my sanity. I was heading home for shelter and safety, but I'd never felt safe there before. I lived in a room in a drafty old red brick Victorian house riddled with damp. I was overdue on rent to the landlady, Miss Whitaker, who was a harsh old woman hoarding money to take to the grave. She didn't allow noise or visitors, and she certainly didn't allow pets. Encountering her with the puppy in my arms was as terrifying as whatever was stalking me, because at least I knew Miss Whitaker was real. But there I was, the noose still in my backpack. I just needed to help out this dog before I could go back to my original plan. Why should I care about anything else? By the time I got home, the clouds had mostly parted, and we were getting the last of the afternoon sunshine. The daylight put me at some ease. I picked up the pup and its food and rushed into the house, hoping to get to the stairs before Miss Whitaker noticed me. Too slow. She appeared behind me in the gloomy hallway as I was halfway up the stairs. "Shouldn't you be at work?" she asked in a tone that was searching for a problem. "Day off," I replied without turning around, hoping she hadn't spotted the puppy. "Oh, I hope it's payday off. Rent is due," she said with suspicion. "Of course," I said, and continued walking upstairs. "What is that you've got there?" she asked. I turned to face her, resigned to revealing the puppy. But when I turned, the puppy wasn't in my arms. I looked around at the floor and saw no sign of it. Miss Whitaker had a ghostly appearance. Her gray hair and pale face were monochrome in the drab darkness of the hallway. She looked at me impatiently, and eventually I replied, "Nothing. It's just some shopping. Nothing too expensive, I hope. You need to pay my rent," she snapped. Then I saw it again. Behind Miss Whitaker in the shadows lurked the beast. Its flaming eyes drew up behind her. The shadow grew, almost submerging her in a shadowy void. For a moment, I hoped it would pull her in. Miss Whitaker said something, but I wasn't listening to her, concerned only with the specter in the shadows. I turned and rushed to the bottom of the stairs, but Miss Whitaker recoiled from me. I slapped at the light switch and the hallway brightened, the creature disappearing. Then I ran back up to my room. I slammed the door behind me and put the light on, then rushed over to the debris of dirty washing and litter to the window to pull the curtains open, exposing the remaining day to erase any darkness from the bedroom. I put the puppy on the floor and suddenly felt disgusted with myself. The room was filthy. Dirty dishes were stacked on the bedside table. Every surface was caked with dust. I could barely see the carpet for my mess. This wasn't a fit place for a dog to live. I had the immediate urge to tidy up. I cleaned a small space in the corner and emptied half the tin of dog food onto a clean bowl. While the puppy ate, I tidied up. Then I heard stomping up the stairs, Miss Whitaker shouting out, "What is wrong with you? Why have you put the lights on? That is my electricity you're wasting." She then banged on the door. "Have you got the lights on in there too? Open up." "Sorry, I just need some light. I'm tidying." "You? Ha!" This was the closest I had ever come to hearing her laugh. "Turn it off now, or you can move out." "Please, just Leave me alone for a bit." She banged on the door again. "Off, now." When she noticed the light remains on, she said, "Fine, I'll sort it myself," and stomped back downstairs. The puppy was eating happily. I found a half-full bottle of water and emptied it into a small dish for him to drink. I watched him while sitting on the edge of my bed. Then the puppy had his fill and came over to sit by my feet. I lifted him onto the bed and he got comfortable, resting his head on my thigh as his amber eyes looked up at me. He began to sleep as I stroked the top of his head, and it seemed at that moment we were both content. Then the lights went out. Miss Whitaker must have switched my electricity off at the fuse box. The fading daylight from outside the window was not enough to extinguish the shadows in the corner by the wardrobe. Flaming eyes slowly appeared from nowhere, as if the darkness was a doorway. The monster was in my room. I picked up the puppy and edged away along the bed. Soon my back was against the wall and I had nowhere else to go. The fiery eyes grew closer. Ethereal wisps danced from the darkness until my eyes could finally make sense of their shape and movement. I could see a vague outline of 4 limbs walking, hackles raised down its back. A muzzle snarled at me, dripping with drool. The great hound became clearer beyond its spectral hue, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. It had a pale streak down its back like the puppy. It padded beyond the shadow to show thick, shaggy black fur. It was ready to pounce at any minute. It gave a guttural growl, exposing great white fangs. While I recoiled helplessly, the puppy squirmed free and clambered down my leg to the floor, the ridge of pale fur down its back showing white with ethereal light. It ran over to the great black beast, which never broke its gaze away from me. Then, as if breaking from a trance, it looked down at the pup, lowering its snout towards it. "No!" I shouted. I couldn't let it devour the helpless thing. "No!" I shouted again. I picked up the lamp from my bedside table in a pathetic attempt to brandish any sort of weapon. The beast looked at me with contempt, then looked back down at the puppy. It lowered its snout and licked it across its face. The puppy brushed up against the monster and wagged its tail. The great hound inspected the pup with sniffs and licks of maternal care. The mother then picked the puppy up by the scruff of the neck, and they walked into the shadow, fading into wisps of spectral light before disappearing. The puppy appears every so often to play, no matter where I am, home, work, even when I was in the police interview room. The mother is never far away. They usually disappear back into the shadows before anyone else can see them. Usually, those who have seen them don't live long to tell about it. I know they think they're protecting me, but they didn't need to kill Mrs. Whitaker. I didn't notice for a few days until the smell crept through the floorboards. At her door, I heard the buzzing of flies. I called the police to break into her room, and they found her mauled. The coroner ruled that it was a dog attack, although they couldn't explain how a dog got in and out of the locked room. The mother never fully comes out of the shadows, but she watches me. In the corner of my eye, I'll catch its fiery gaze. I don't think she means me harm, but I've seen what she can do, and it's hard not to be afraid. The pup is a good boy, but they're both overprotective. I've seen their eyes appear whenever anyone angers or upsets me. I know she intends to kill them. Death seems like nothing to her. My supervisor at work was found dead in the stockroom after he criticized the time I had taken off due to my mental health. I admit it got to me. He was mauled like Mrs. Whitaker. The hound also appeared after my ex-girlfriend came over and demanded her TV back. She forced her way in, and I was desperate for her to leave, so I ended up giving it to her. But it wasn't about the TV. She was just insistent on arguing. She didn't make it out of the house. I tried to stop them. After the deaths, I had to run. I'm innocent, I swear it, but if the police turn up to arrest me, I can't imagine what the hounds would do to them. I found somewhere secluded to live. I won't say where, but it seems mostly safe, and I'm content with a simple life off the grid. I have had occasional troubles. Some men tried to break into the caravan where I've been staying. That didn't last long. I had to bury their bodies in a ditch one night. The dogs were just protecting me. At least I'm not suicidal anymore. What does that say about me, that I'm willing to live even when I'm such a risk to others? As long as people leave me alone, they'll be safe. I don't have much time, so if things sound a little weird, just bear with me. This is a warning. If you see black clouds at all, just run. Doesn't matter where you are. I don't know if this thing is spreading. I'm getting ahead of myself. On April 5th, my wife and I took off for a wedding in Vermont. Before we left, we heard the news talk about a big northeastern storm that's going to drop a bunch of snow and ice. Even though it looks like we're going to be okay since our plane is landing technically in New Hampshire, just south of the storm. The flight was 2 hours, but about halfway through the trip, the clouds started to change color. Not gray like you'd expect. Darker, more like black, looking more like volcanic ash clouds than normal storm clouds. My wife was busy playing her Nintendo Switch, but since I was laid off, I had a lot on my mind. I was a little surprised that nobody else noticed it, but off in the distance, I could have sworn I saw something move in the distance. It was hard to tell. It sort of looks like a wing swooping through the clouds, like a fish that makes 180s at the surface. The pressure wake pushed the clouds outward, like something was coming and then changed its mind. It had to be a trick of the eye, probably. It had to be the sun hitting and reflecting away off the ash clouds. I shouldn't have been assuming they were ash clouds, but time proved me right. The pilot never made any announcement, and I didn't really see anything either, so I kept my mouth shut. Maybe if I hadn't, things would have turned out different for Courtney. When I looked away, I happened to catch one of the flight attendants staring at her. Her head slightly tilted, and she wouldn't take her eyes off of me. It sounds strange, but it felt like she was waiting to see if I was about to tell my wife what I had seen. I decided to keep looking busy, and even decided to shut my eyes for a few minutes. Thinking she had just seen something might distract the old veteran stewardess's attention. It had to be about 10 minutes because I listened to my favorite song twice and another song before opening my eyes. And to my shock, she was still looking at me. Now, her teeth looked different, like she was trying hard to smile. I swear it looked like her gums were bleeding. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom, the one farthest from her. That must have done the trick, because when I came back, she had moved on to her normal duties of serving passengers. When I got back, my wife finally noticed the black clouds, but by this time we could barely see past the wing. Did the pilots see anything? Not wanting to worry her, I assured her they have all kinds of communications and radar. Even if they can't see in front of them, they know where they're going. She gave me a look. Courtney was like that. She could see right through me like an MRI machine. The fasten seatbelt sign came on, and with it, the pilot's voice. Attention travelers, we'll be making our final descent momentarily. Please make sure all loose items are stored, as you won't be needing them. What's that mean? That was weird. I looked around and thankfully someone else, who I would shortly find out was our air marshal for the flight, stood up and headed for the cockpit, his face a mask of concern. He shut the drapes behind him so no one could see him. I heard him knocking loudly and asking to be let in. Just then, the stewardess from earlier rushed by me, running against my arm. Suddenly, my arm was in drastic pain. I looked down, and it looked like someone had taken a cheese grater to it. My wife looked to try and help me. Oh God, are you okay? What happened? I told her I wasn't sure and started pressing dirty paper towels and Skittles wrappers on my wound to stop the bleeding. My wife yelped for help. Other people started looking, and in the confusion, nobody else saw the air marshal struggling, except me, as he was pulled into the bathroom by the stewardess. Except she now looked more like a demon, with black scales on the forearms of her lethal hands and sharp claws. There was panic on the man's face, or maybe it was pain, I don't know. Just as the door shut, I could see the man's skin turning red as if it were being burned off by a torch, or whatever that thing pretending to be a stewardess was. Before I could tell anyone to look, the air marshal disappeared into the airplane bathroom. By this time, my wife had noticed my face and looked up front, but she didn't see anything. "Are you okay?" I tried to tell her something. It took the air marshal, but she just looked at me in confusion. And that was when the gunshot rang out in the cabin. The bullets began flying out of the bathroom from where the air marshal had been dragged. His screams were guttural. He must have gotten loose, but he never made it out. More bullets went off, and everyone scattered. Several shots hit the cockpit, and luckily they didn't penetrate the bulletproof door. Unfortunately, one of the bullets did shoot out the pressurized windows. The next few minutes were a blur. Everyone was panicking, and with no direction, everyone braced for the inevitable. I looked out the window just as we were about to hit. We were through the clouds, and what I was seeing wasn't New Hampshire. It looked like some kind of hellscape. Lava rivers and large mounds in the distance, horned monstrosities roaming the outskirts of the airport. The barbed wire fencing that lay more like fences made from rubber or skin, and the buildings were covered in ash and strange demonic symbols. After that, it was only blackness. I came to eventually, hanging and nearly falling out of my seat. I appeared to be only a few feet off the ground, and I was alone. My wife's seat was broken clean off. I can't see her, and I don't see anyone else living. I prepared myself and unlatched the seatbelt. I tucked and managed to save my 33-year-old ankles when I hit the ground. I stood up, letting my bearings hit me, when I finally got to look around and noticed there was no sun. It should have been there. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but it looks like midnight out there. Alone and scared, I tried calling out, but I was afraid to draw the attention of those giant monsters I'd seen just before the crash. Just then, I heard a girl screaming. Instinct kicked in, and I ran to help. I jumped over the debris and body parts from the passengers. All I could think was that it might be Courtney, and I had to do something. I rounded one of the plane engines that was on fire, and I wish I didn't see what I had witnessed next. An early 20s Gen Z girl covered in dirt, her face cut and badly bleeding. So bad I couldn't tell if she still had her eyes. But then the worst of it finally hit me when I realized what she was doing. She was feeling for her legs, or her lack thereof. She cried out, screaming for her mother, while she grabbed at the stumps of what had been her legs. I have to admit I was scared. I was in shock. How could I help her? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't let her suffer alone. I took a step when suddenly I heard another woman, but this one wasn't screaming. She was laughing. Suddenly, a beautiful, terrifying demon woman walked around the corner, and with her came 2 tiny, crawling demons. "Oh, my child, save your screams. We're just getting started." With that, she snapped her fingers, and I watched as the demons tore into the poor girl. Her screams drew more of the demon dogs. "The more you despair, the more you will suffer. Embrace the suffering, and you will be released from it." The girl cried as best she could as the monster tore into her throat, but with one last breath, she must have gave her what the demon wanted. Suddenly, they were surrounded in black smoke and disappeared. The demon dogs, the demon woman, and the girl, all gone. I was left alone among the debris, the death, the ash-filled air. I didn't know what to do. I found a place to hide. I thought this was hell. Found out later, it wasn't. After having a breakdown under the debris of the crashed plane and still having no idea if my wife was even alive, I had this weird feeling that I had to keep going. It just kept saying, keep alive, keep moving. I can hear those demon dogs coming. I need to be fast. Sometime after my encounter, I heard something loud and deep. It was familiar somehow, though. It sounded like an engine, a plane. I ran through piles of debris and burning cars, planes, cruise ships, and buses. I got to the top of the debris mound just in time to see a 747 punch through the clouded barrier. This one landed just like it was supposed to. I looked up and noticed flying demons scattering as the plane hooked the terminal gate. Just then, the hundreds of demons surrounding the tarmac shrieked like they were welcoming something. Just then, from a shadowy hole in the ground, a giant snake erupted. The giant snake-like creature slithered around the plane like a boa constrictor, preparing to suffocate its prey. The doors opened, and immediately I could hear people screaming for their lives. I watched as a humanoid demon dressed like a pilot in a torn uniform, with random horns tearing its suit of skin off. It was like it was wearing a costume. It started throwing passengers off the plane. Demon dogs and other emaciated humanoid demon things began to swarm the passengers. A middle-aged man in a $5,000 suit, he screamed as the creatures tore his clothes off and he was carried into the main terminal. He swung his suitcase like a weapon. Just before he disappeared, one of the smallest humanoid demons jumped up and bit down on his wrist, stopping him from injuring any of the rest of them with that metal suitcase. I could hear him scream even louder, begging for help and to be let go. Before he vanished into the terminal, I saw the little demon tear the guy's hand off. Was that where they took Courtney, I wondered? I navigated my way inside. I don't know why I put myself through these sights of something in me just kept demanding that I move forward. Like I had to see it. I watched as all the passengers from the plane, buses, the people who had just got lost on car rides ended up here. They were sorted onto paths that were surrounded by barbed wire. Come on, you meat sacks, it's time to get sorted out. Which one of you is one of us, and which one of you is for the meat grinder? One of the sick-looking demons with a sharp pike yelled at these poor souls, shuffling them through the giant rotating spikes, just like TSA instructing passengers to go through security. Demon guards pushed each person towards the front of the line, where a larger demon would look at each person to classify them. Aviation, infantry, necrotics, this one has spirit. Training pits, we'll beat that out of you, or we'll eat you. The guy looked like a soldier type. Broad shoulders, tattoos, looked like someone from a movie, with the army guys in Benghazi. One by one, people were chosen for roles in Hell's forces. As far as I can tell, there was a small percent of prisoners that the demons didn't want anything to do with, which I thought was pretty weird. Wouldn't everyone make a good soldier? I never got my answer. One of the flying demons landed near the ventilation duct I was hiding in, and I needed to sneak away. I made my way through the vents. To my relief, nothing was in there with me. At least nothing that ever found me. Eventually, I found my way to the airport authority office. It looked guarded, several bear-type looking guys and big old demons that guarded the door. Using the vents, I quietly snuck in and found what appeared to be a map with some demon casting a spell over the airport. On the giant omnidirectional map, I could see a bubble around the airport. At first I thought it was hiding this place. Whatever that thing in the airport authority office is, it's how they're cloaking the airport, and the demons are building an army with our own people. I don't know how, but somehow in this office I have signal. Maybe it's how no one knows this place is gone. I don't know. I don't know anything up until an hour ago. I didn't even believe in hell. If anyone gets this message, you need to tell everyone about this demon cloaking this place. If it's something more than turning people into demons, I don't know, but we have to save these people. Every plane that lands is either adding more soldiers to the enemy ranks or enslaving more innocent souls. The worst part is, the planes are leaving. Who's on them? I don't know, but they can't be human. I'm going to keep exploring. I can't explain this feeling, but something is telling me that Courtney's not far. I'm going to find out as much as I can and come back here to relay what I can. This has to be the start of something.